All right, Dr. Howard Conyers, you with me, bro?
I'm with you, man.
Okay, so I just want to first thank you for joining me here on this conversation we're about to have. We're going to touch down about some historics on some American barbecue. Um, Thanks for coming, man. Why don't you tell the people who you are?
I'm Howard Conyers. I'm originally from Manor, South Carolina. I'm a multi-generational whole hog barbecue pitmaster. Cook pretty much every animal in the American South. I learned from my father, who's been cooking whole animal cookery in my community for probably 200 years. But really, black folks in America have been cooking whole hog barbecue over 400 years in this country. And so, and the way I cook is actually the exact same way as our enslaved ancestors who developed this practice of barbecue. When you look at barbecue in America, it's pretty much, it looked whitewashed, but to be real with you, it's all black because they were cooking in earth dug trenches. So that's kind of what I do, who I am, what I do for a living. I'm a rocket scientist, I'm an engineer. I have a PhD in mechanical engineering, and I have an undergraduate degree in bioenvironmental engineering.
By the way, um, that's just a little, by the way, brother. All right, that's cool. So clearly, very accomplished dude. Okay, but you said that you're a third generation farmer, right?
My family been farming since enslavement, bro. My family haven't, like where I grew up in South Carolina, my family was enslaved in that community. I was probably, the church that I grew up in was where they actually went when they was enslaved. So we haven't moved once we got off the boat.
Wow, incredible. And what were you guys farming there, or still farming there?
Primarily corn and sweet potatoes now, but growing, my parents used to farm, my father in particular, and my grandfather, in the community I grew up, they farm cotton. And so they was picking cotton by hand, and then where my mother's from in Nichols, South Carolina, which is different from Manor, they were growing tobacco.
Right. So now you've kind of transitioned. I mean, you're an what do you call yourself? An astrophysicist? Like,
I'm like a mechanical design lead for helping to test rocket engines for the U.S. government.
Gotcha. Okay. So you do that, but also you do this thing that you're very passionate about where you are talking and spitting about the history of American barbecue, right? And like you said in your preamble, there's a sensibility that it's kind of like what you call a whitewash of American barbecue history, right?
Oh yeah.
So break down where you see the whitewash happen, first of all.
Break down where I see the whitewash happen. So let me just show you a little something real quick, Roger.
Yeah.
So just to kind of help people understand this poster, right? So this picture here is the pit that my father learned how to cook barbecue in South Carolina in.
Yep.
When I was on Man Fire Food, we cooked on a pit that sort of looked like that.
Yep.
And so it's the exact same correlation. And so actually, this was on your show.
Yeah.
And this is the pit that you helped me dig.
So it's basically a hole we dug in the ground, and then there's a frame around it that has some cross pieces that the pig sits in, right?
Correct. And so I did that to kind of give you a spec, to go back further in time so you get a clear annotation of blacks in barbecue.
All right.
So if you look at this picture here, you see this man, this black man in particular, shoveling coals underneath the hog pit, underneath the earth dug pit.
Yeah.
So you take that, and that pig looked almost identical to what I was growing up, what we did on Man Fire Food, and also what my father did. But what we did is went above ground when I was a child.
Yeah.
And now you look at this picture here, is a character on a plantation. And you see who's doing that work. And the only thing that was different between what they're using for holding the pig up, they're using wooden tree limbs, and we were using metal pipes and rebar.
Right. So I got a question, bro. So what year are those pictures that you just showed up?
So I believe this picture from the top is from the late 1800s. This picture here is from North Carolina in 1944. My father last cooked in the ground in 1975, and then they really started bringing the pits above ground and using like cinder block pits, old fuel tanks, manufacturing pits for metal. So when barbecue became whitewashed, to answer your question, I would say a time frame between the early 1900s and the 1950s. But in the back of those barbecue restaurants, because they didn't allow black folks to own many things, in some of those restaurants, all of pretty much the barbecue restaurant, black people was in the back there cooking. So they was cooking these barbecues in the pits, let's say early 2000 when the show Pitmasters came out. That is when barbecue really went on this faddish trend, and that's when they started using the word pitmaster. Growing up in South Carolina, we never used the word pitmaster. I never heard of that word. The guys who I learned how to cook barbecue, most of them had other occupations. They was either farmers for the most part. They had some agricultural history. The other parts, they maybe were truck drivers. They worked in manufacturing plants. But that was just kind of something they did. But most of the people who practice this craft, they was in farming communities.
Gotcha. And so that's coming down. So you're showing pictures there from the mid to late 1800s, but the legacy of slavery, as we know, goes before that. And is that lineage coming from, white slave masters not wanting to do certain work? And so, because traditionally the African slaves were in the house or in the kitchens cooking the meals for the slave owners and the plantation owners, right? And so that's an adapted thing where they're taking this tradition from Africa and bringing it into the cultural, their new home, quote unquote.
So really, it was also partially, they had, when they were doing these barbecues, it was generally like a big cookout to show the planters' wealth. It was a way to kind of show their status, elitism. And so when they did this, they were cooking for anywhere from 50 people to could be 500. And sometimes the literature say they were cooking for 1,000 people. So with that, you have these enslaved Africans who were digging these long trenches because there is no kitchen that you can use inside a house or the big house, a kitchen behind the big house to cook for that many people. So they was outside, and cooking whole hog barbecue was very laborious back then because you also had you didn't have refrigeration in the 1600s up until like the 1950s. So when you got ready to do a barbecue, you had to actually slaughter the hog or slaughter any animal. They cook lambs, goats, sheep, chicken, turkeys, and pigs or shoats. But also you had to get the wood together. And they'll oftentimes send the little boys in the woods to help gather the firewood. Then there'll be another crew of enslaved people working to do the butchering of the animal.
Not to mention it's dangerous work, because harvesting wood, there's water moccasins out there, there's scorpions, there's all kind of stuff that's going to come and get you. So they don't want to go and do it. So they send the slaves, right?
They send the slaves. And water moccasins, rattlesnakes in these woods. And they didn't have no skill saw, no chainsaw. They actually had a crosscut saw, and they going back and forth with their hands. And so no slave master who has a lot of wealth is not going to do that work, period, point blank. I could never see any slave master shoveling maybe. If they shovel anything, it'd be one scoop of coals. But other than that, they was not staying outside 12 to 18 to 24 hours just to cook the animal. So cooking barbecue was probably, on a plantation day, I would imagine the day was a 24-hour process, if not a 36-hour process with all the preparation.
So how that transition go from, Jim Crow era, post-slavery, and the slaves just took that tradition with them because they've been doing it now for hundreds of years. They just took that with them and started to feed the community because these are now segregated communities. You can't go and just cook for a white family just like that, right? So you have to keep this inside of your community, and that's where they've continued to master that craft, right?
By the time they got to segregated communities, they was perfectionists. They was experts by the time the segregated communities came around, because at that point they were sharecropping. But a lot of people don't realize that sharecropping and Jim Crow, that's the same thing as a different plant. It's another form of a plantation system. And what was different between in the Jim Crow era or sharecropping, that America got more advanced technologically. So you start seeing the Industrial Revolution. You start seeing more metal pipes, thin metals, and that's where you start seeing cinder blocks, and that's where you see the wooden tree limbs start to go on away into the documentation. So it's really, as America grew, barbecue grew with it. And even when America went to war, things that was invented to use for war actually got repurposed and incorporated into barbecue, especially World War II, to be specific.
Gotcha. And so during that era too, coming out, it's still very segregated, arguably still very segregated. The only way you can congregate safely is at the church or at the barbecue.
It's funny you say that. It is pretty much the safest place to be, but the barbecue was probably safer than the church because they didn't mind, the Ku Klux Klan particularly didn't mind burning down a church. But with a barbecue, you will see white races cross over racial lines to get barbecue. And you will still see a lot of that to this day. I mean, up until like the 80s and 90s, you will see like they're going to a black neighborhood, and I think it was because of historical memory, like blacks can cook barbecue.
Yeah. You know, that reminds me of a story, man. I shot an episode, Man Fire Food. I believe it was in Virginia. It was a black barbecue pitmaster family, many generations doing that there. And what you're saying about it being segregated, you know, I talked to the owners there, and they're saying, you know, in this town, it's very segregated. But when they come to this parking lot and this restaurant, everybody eats at the table. And as soon as they walk out the door, it's totally, and this is like 3 years ago, it's totally segregated, right? And he'll see people that he talks to regularly in his store, but if they see him at the Walmart, they just pass him straight.
Really? I'm not surprised to see that, though. I mean, honestly, like I went to Jack Cobb in Farmville, North Carolina, and Mariana Jones Barbecue and Mariana's Barbecue in Mariana, Arkansas. And they basically said the same thing. It's just like their customers, they're very segregated, but they will come eat that plate of barbecue.
Yeah, come eat that barbecue. Yeah. And it's subsequently, very interestingly enough, coming with the time that's happening this week, he told me we were sitting on the stoop towards the end of shooting by the parking lot at the end. And behind us was this big open field. And he says to me, he goes, yo, you know, back here a couple weeks ago, they found a little black kid hanging from a tree. And I said, what? I said, what? What are you talking about, man? He goes, yeah, man, you know, they found this kid hanging from the tree and they said it was a suicide, but there was no ladder, there was no chair, nothing. And my face was just flabbergasted. He just looked at me straight in my face. He goes, this is still the South, my brother.
So since you brought that up, I'm not that surprised either. It's shocking that people say about people hanging themselves, but I thought growing up in South Carolina, rural South Carolina, it was like kind of post-racial. I went to integrated schools, but in the 90s, my parents always kind of like talk about racism, but they wanted us to be realistic in that vein and know it exists. But then we had 3 churches that burned in Clarendon County, and the Ku Klux Klan came out and said that we burned these churches down. They were black churches. And so that made you realize that this is still the South.
You know, it's interesting, man. You know, over the years, I've read a lot of stuff about barbecue just to kind of understand what's going on. And when I face people like you that I could talk knowledgeably about it and stuff like that, and I discovered a lot of information about a lot of black people used to prep the food for the Klan rallies. There'd be like dozens of black people peeling onions and potatoes at the Klan rally to feed the people in the Klan. And then at a certain point, they just said, yo, this is crazy. You know, we're fortifying these people to come and kill us. They would stop digging pits and stop doing the cooking and the prepping for the Klan rallies. And in some instances, that led to kind of the spiraling or winding down of the mass acceptance of the Klan in parts of those communities, right?
I mean, I really can't say that don't sound so far-fetched. I mean, because the Klansmen in a lot of these communities were the police officers. They were the judges.
And the ministers.
They were the DAs. And so because of that, these black people didn't have the choice but to cook for them.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them worked the land, or they all worked the land that they were probably enslaved on. And the fear that they put on black folks was just horrendous in the South. I don't even know it's just amazing to think about what black people have went through to be in this country, Roger, all this aside.
Yeah, no, I know, man. And you know what's interesting is like this conversation is starting, we're talking about all this, but we're still talking about barbecue. We're still talking about food, feeding people, barbecue, burning fires, burning wood, and feeding people. And it crosses all these societal touch points. And, you know, this is why I kind of laugh when people come spit at me, because, you know, I'm very vocal about all kinds of things. You know, in the past, I've been very vocal on records that I made, and I reserve a lot of that stuff for records. And you could check my records. There's like there's a decade of stuff. I've been saying stuff because it's just such a better medium, right?
Okay.
but more recently I've been more vocal, and you get the same thing, and I get the same thing that I see athletes get. You know, they're like, shut up and dribble, shut up and cook. I come here because you cook, and blah 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 blah. But yo, I cook, but we're talking cooking, but it touches every touch point in society. You can't separate the two things. So we here. That's why we here, right?
No, you're exactly right. I mean, even I've been thinking about this thing recently, just how pivotal the whole hog been to my life. But racism didn't start yesterday. Racism started 400 years ago, and barbecue, as we know it, was right there in the early side, on that first side of it. And
So tell me about that. Tell me about that. Expand that so people can understand.
So in Virginia, they would have political rallies, and people would cook. Enslaved Africans would cook and cook barbecue. Then, as America got its independence from Britain in 1776, the 4th of July, which is one of the most popular barbecue holidays, enslaved Africans were still cooking pit cook barbecue for the elite plantation owners. You take that fast forward to 1865, 1865 with Juneteenth, they were cooking in pits, but they were finally emancipated in 1865. But that memo came 2 years late, Roger. It wasn't like it was. They got the notice in like Galveston, Texas, that it was emancipated in 1863. And you just keep coming forward that whole hog, and it always showed up, and it was always there up until about the 50s and 60s when you got to these more refrigeration, the more electricity came to America. That's when you start seeing the slaughterhouse, the commodity pork, the stockyards, and that's where you start seeing the kind of division. You don't see the whole hog as frequently when you start going to Chicago's or New York's or places where the Great Migration occurred. But if you think about Kansas City, for example, everybody talk about Kansas City is known for ribs. But if you look at like Henry Gates was from Shelby, Tennessee, and he was bringing that whole hog, that technique of cooking from Tennessee to Kansas City. And all the knowledge of barbecue in America transferred in the heads of enslaved people. And it came absolutely clear to me when I went to my community in South Carolina, and I know we've been doing it a long time. Then I went to Eastern North Carolina, and Eastern North Carolina, like they were talking about, it's different, but they had the same vinegar pepper-based barbecue sauce, say like Grady's or Sam Jones is known for, but then you say Rodney Scott in Hemingway, starting in Hemingway, and then with the Charleston, they have a vinegar-based pepper barbecue sauce. Yeah. But then I went to Marietta, Arkansas, about an hour and a half outside of Memphis. And I think one day, Roger, you should go out there to Marietta just to kind of see it if you're ever in the Memphis area.
Yeah, yeah.
And this guy, Mr. Jones, his family has a vinegar pepper-based barbecue sauce. They cook in those cinder block pits. They burning the wood down, and their family been cooking barbecue well into slavery. And I think his family is the only one that I know that could probably document with names to their family Bibles, potentially that legacy. But how did that knowledge travel? There was no YouTube. There was no books. We couldn't read or write.
In the mouth, hand to hand.
Hand to hand, apprenticeship. And that's how I learned how to do barbecue. Even when I cooked in the ground for your show, there was no pictures. Growing up, we didn't take any pictures of cooking barbecue. My first family cooking barbecue probably came in the 2006 time frame, and I was born in 81. So that's, y'all do the math. So my father didn't take any pictures of cooking earthed up pits. And so cooking just one hog prior to being on Man Fire Food in the ground, I knew I had to start recreating those things to give a visual imagery to also capture that knowledge out of people's heads, like my father, just so people have a visual receipt of what it looks like.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting you referencing whole hog, because you go back to Hercules, the first black chef in the White House. George Washington's personal chef was a black guy, because that's what we did back then, right? And cooking for the elites, they're cooking whole hog. But it's interesting you talk about whole hog, because I referenced an article in I think it was 2015 or 2016 Texas Monthly, and one of the Texas Monthly criteria at the time, I don't know if it's still like this, is they judge their barbecue based on brisket. But what's interesting about that is that format, and perhaps intentional or not, that format, Black people didn't cook brisket, right? The tradition was chicken, pork, whole hog, ribs, beef sausages, that kind of stuff.
It could have been whole cows, but the literature said whole cows, steers, or oxen. and that was quite common too. It wasn't just whole hogs. I think whole hogs survive because that animal reproduce very well, and if you're a poor farmer, you can't really afford to keep a whole lot of cows laying around, but you can keep a pen full of hogs. So I think that's the reason the whole hog lasted the test of time versus the whole cow barbecue.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, just in referencing your whole the whitewashing of the barbecue scene, you know, it's little things like that, little institutions like that that help to pervade that. All of a sudden, you go in the top 100 of the Texas Monthly, and there's no black people in there, right? And it's because they're judging on brisket, but black people weren't cooking brisket. It was beef, sausages, and pork.
Sausages, hot links, and they wasn't killing an animal to make just sausage. I mean, like, that's one of the reasons one of my last cooks, Roger, one of my last public cooks was the whole cow. I wanted to cook a whole cow because nobody in my community, black people, never cooked the whole cow real recently, in recent memory. And I asked my father about it, and he said, "You're crazy, son." But I asked him why he didn't cook whole cows, and he said, like, when they was fortunate enough to have a cow, that cow was intended for milking purposes.
Yep.
They got rid of that cow. They went and got another cow. So I cooked the whole cow because I wanted to reclaim that knowledge of American barbecue for black people. And we had to design a pit to cook it in, and it was a beautiful thing. And I wanted to show the ingenuity behind me being a pit master, but also the ingenuity of black farmers like my father to be able to make the things we need to execute American barbecue.
Yeah, it's amazing, man. I thank you for doing that, man. It's pretty incredible, you know, because yeah, you see a lot of these spots and they just don't get the love. And so being able to help tell that story like that, it's a pretty amazing thing. And I got to tell you, in the last 2 weeks, I never got so many press requests to talk about barbecue.
Really? It was like that, Roger? You laughing. I mean, I'm in the same boat, man. I kind of have to pick and choose. I'm trying to discern which ones I want to talk about all those sides. Now that you say it, and I got today, I'm trying to squeeze in 2 or 3 talks on barbecue. Yeah, but I felt this one was the most important of all the ones, just because the camaraderie, the messaging I'm seeing you talking about on Instagram, and people need to understand the intersection of food and race is a real thing in America.
Absolutely. You know, it just was it last year or 2 years ago, the homie Rodney Scott just got his James Beard Award. The first black barbecue, I think it's the first black barbecue in American history, Rodney Scott, right?
Yeah, but it's crazy, man. That's a whole nother crazy story, because I recommended his family to get the American Classic Award like 2 years beforehand, because I thought fundamentally his family deserved that award for cooking whole hog barbecue in that manner. Not even like Rodney himself. I just thought the family deserved it.
The family, yeah. I met the family. I met the dad. It's amazing.
Mom, so I mean, I recommended them for the American Classic, but for Rodney to be the first one, and you see it over and over again. Like, Rodney was nominated. So I nominated Rodney for the Barbecue Hall of Fame last year.
Yeah.
And make it to the nomination committee. For I can't remember the Barbecue Hall of Fame Society, but then Aaron Franklin got up there and they nominated and he got in too.
And yo, Aaron Franklin is good. Aaron Franklin is good, bro.
He might be good, but
don't twist it. I like Aaron Franklin. He's good.
I'm not gonna wait in that line for no brisket. I'm sorry. I mean, I went to Austin and ate one time, but I just think like they should have made an exception and let Rodney and Aaron Franklin in at the same time if you're gonna let Aaron Franklin in.
And you know, they let in Henry Perry, Big Daddy Bishop, C.B. Stubberfield, but posthumously. Posthumously.
Guy's dead, man. That can't benefit.
Posthumously. They let him in. They're dead, but they let him in, bro. They let him in.
They let him in. I mean, I think they did let a woman in this year, Desiree, I can't remember her name, but Desiree something out of Tennessee. And I haven't had her food, but I mean, I had Miss Helen Turner. I nominated her for the Barbecue Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
And for me, Roger, it wasn't about me being recognized for barbecue. I wanted other people to get credit for what they've been putting in their hard work and labor. Mm-hmm. I wanted people like my father to get credit. That's the reason when we shot Man Fire Food, I said, like, you all got to come to New Orleans and be in here. And I was so grateful that their team actually incorporated them into the end of the show.
Yeah, of course, man.
Because they the ones that taught me how to barbecue. They're the ones that taught me how to prepare it. My father maybe cooked it, but my mom was the one that actually taught me how to actually work the meat.
It's amazing, you know, and that's your mom, you know, and that's the history and the tradition of the women in the family too. You got Helen. I shot with Helen, and we cooked those pork butts, man. Made them sandwiches. There's the Jones sisters in Kansas City. I've yet to meet them. Have you met the Jones sisters?
I haven't met the Jones sisters. Boy, Miss Turner, boy, that food over there. Woo.
Woof, so fire, right?
Man, y'all was waiting want to take a trip, Roger. Yeah, man, that food is fire, man.
The food is fire, though. Yeah.
But no, it's a beautiful thing. But I don't know, man. It's crazy how we got written out the barbecue narrative, and I hope through some of my work that I help to personally write some of those people back into those legacies and understand what America has been missing. Because a lot of the books they give like excerpts and they incomplete, Roger, and I knew they was incomplete. And the only reason I knew they was incomplete because I was passed down the countless years of oral history as well as actually doing it. So it was kind of like second nature. I didn't know. People say, which one you became first, a rocket scientist or a pitmaster now for today terms. And I would say I was a pitmaster first, long before even thinking about testing rockets.
It's incredible, bro. That's incredible. You know, that's the thing. You could help us leave the planet, but you want to stay here and cook some pigs.
That's crazy, right?
Okay, so check this out, right? We were spitting, and you were telling me that in the interest of continuing the barbecue tradition in the Black community, you're endeavoring to try and open your own barbecue spot, but you're facing a lot of institutional situations in terms of being able to open that spot. If you want to, can you just touch light on what those challenges are for you? And please lay it out. You're a well-educated man.
I'm gonna lay it out for you. So this was about 4 years ago. I said, what would it take for Howard Conyers to open a restaurant? Dr. Howard Conyers to open a restaurant. So I asked my personal banker. I say, so I want to buy the building and do the barbecue restaurant. It don't have to be in the most influential neighborhood, but I say I got a good paying job, got a great W-2 if that's what the bank asking for. I got a great credit score. It was probably over 740, 750 at the time period.
Ha.
So you almost think you're almost perfect. I got assets and collateral. I mean,
almost perfect.
But assets and collateral, had passive income.
You're golden. You're good.
I should have been good, but the banker told me, like, honestly, like, you're not bankable. Then you will have to be able to run this barbecue restaurant. You have to work full time. And I'm like, historically, people only run barbecue restaurants like 3 days a week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Yeah.
And he told me I wasn't bankable, and he would have to be an investor. And after that, I said I'd never have to. And at that time, it was a test of.
Can I stop you there 1 second? What's very interesting about that statement is, in one side he says you're not bankable, but the second part of it is you're bankable enough that he wants to put his money into it and be a part owner of it. So the dichotomy of that in itself is just blows it all out the window and blows this whole case. There's something else going on, my brother. There's something else.
I didn't think about that at the time, but I did sort of thought about it because it's almost like the continual exploitation of Black people. Almost like a football player. If somebody can make a little bit of money off you, then it's okay. But if you want to make money off yourself, then it's a problem.
Hey, you can't be owning the block, right? Look at Tulsa, right? It's like, there's too much power on this set of blocks here. We got to deal with that, right?
You can't.
This is 3-4 years ago. You said, right? So you go back then, and then you in the same position right now, and then people out there, politicians out there, saying there's no such thing as institutional racism is just blasphemy.
Oh, man, that's blasphemy, Roger. I could tell you stories with the banking institutions. It's absurd. And so when I think about people trying to get restaurants who don't have the credentials I have or have the credit score or the assets, and I'm like, there's no way. So therefore, they got to do pop-ups. They got to try to get a food truck. And with cooking barbecue, it's just not sustainable.
Yeah.
And then when you have to depend on people to, when you're renting a building, you're at the mercy of the landlord. If the landlord starts to see you doing good, he could decide to jack the rent up because he had you in a catch-22. He had you in a bind. What you gonna do? Go leave and start back over?
Yeah.
So owning a building is important, but it's just the things you got to go through to get it.
Yep. Okay, so how did you start accumulating? I know you're very passionate about it. You were passed down this information from a lineage. So how did you start accumulating information and getting resources? What resources did you go to kind of find some of this information and be able to pull these pictures and understand that beyond the oral tradition that your family passed down to you? Because not everybody has that access to that. People may look at this and be very inquisitive about that. People who look like us or not, right? I'm open for everybody. I'm spread love for everybody. So if people are looking for information, how is it that they can access information to see this stuff for themselves so they don't think that it's me and you talking in an echo chamber, just spilling this out?
Okay, so what got me into doing this personally was there was a list by Fox News or whatever, and they had the most influential pitmasters. On that list, they didn't have anybody. And the rebuttals came out by Daniel Vaughn or Texas Monthly and Robert Moss talking about enslaved Africans. And y'all can look him up. Robert Moss writes for Southern Liberty Magazine. He has a lot of references out there. And Daniel Vaughn, and they talk about enslaved Africans doing barbecue. So as I start looking at some of the pictures, I look at the pictures and the hog looked like my father's, looked like the hog that I cooked. I mean, when it's butterflied out, wide open on the pit, it looks almost identical. Then, so I said, one day I asked my father, I was giving a lecture at Dillard University for the Ray Charles program for material culture. And I asked my father to draw a picture of the pit. And I looked at the picture of the pit. I looked at what was in the archives. And I'm gonna give the people some reference sources so they can fact check what I'm talking about.
Yeah, what we'll do, Howard, if you're down, you send me a short list of a few different things, and okay, I'll post it on my takeover. When I do the takeover, I'm going to be posting some books and some educational tools, biographies and stuff like that as well. But okay, if you're willing, please give us a short list of a few things and resources people could go to so we could hit them. But hit me with this.
So so when I saw those pictures, I said, okay, that's American barbecue. Then I said, I look at the things, I saw the gaps, and then I start reading books. Robert Moss wrote a book, The History of Barbecue. And he kind of like glossed over slavery at the beginning and then kind of went to the early 1900s. I read a book by Joseph Haynes on Virginia barbecue, and that's probably been the most comprehensive book I read on barbecue. And it really talked a lot about Black people, but I think where I was struggling to get the ties to the indigenous community, I don't think they did a good job of that. And my question, as an engineer, I'm an engineer, Roger. So I'm also study the history, but I'm a challenge the history too. Just because somebody write it down in a book, I don't have to accept that. So I'm gonna ask questions.
Of course.
And so I haven't seen like receipts of indigenous people. So I start going to like university archives across the South, getting old pictures. North Carolina has a great archive of barbecue history pictures. A picture I posted on Instagram this week came from the University of North Carolina, I believe, or North Carolina Archives. But that's kind of how I got the knowledge. I read something called a WPA narrative. It was the enslaved narratives that were recorded by somebody else during the 1930s. But when you read those narratives, they're not complete, Roger. So that was kind of why I knew I had to do some of this work. I need to be able to fill in those blanks because I knew the work. But other reference sources are just kind of like articles that came out periodically. There's this J.C. Reed out of Houston. I think he wrote for the Houston Chronicle. He writes some stuff on barbecue. And on occasionally he'll write something about blacks in barbecue. And that's kind of, I start reading articles and I just really start doing that. And then I start looking at my own community where I grew up at as a researcher. And so I start talking different older men in my community besides my father, who was around that age, and start talking to them one-on-one and ask them questions, in addition to traveling around the country without cameras and eating barbecue from, I would think, the last probably 8 Black whole hog barbecue joints in the country.
I love that you travel around. You take your time off of work, you spend your own money, and you travel around and go to the spots. I know you went to Africa this year too. You went diving in, you went looking for this history to try and figure out and trace the lineage of this thing. And I love that you're out there, man. You're studying this and challenging it, but you're putting your money where your mouth is, and you really dedicated your life. As you say, you work in NASA doing rocket engines, but you really dedicate your life to this trajectory, man, and I respect that, and I thank you for that.
Yeah, and actually, I went to your home country to try to track it down too, man.
Yeah, Trinidad.
I went to Trinidad, man, and what was interesting about Trinidad, I went to Trinidad and Tobago, and I wanted to understand. You see some people call it a bucaneering. You always see in the barbecue literature, where basically say the indigenous community was cooking over racks, over country limbs, and I actually saw that firsthand in Trinidad when I went. I think about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Man, that was some good bread too. I think I went to Costara and everything, but that's off topic. But
well, Trinidad got a lot of oil, so there's a lot of oil drums. So it's a tradition of taking the oil drums and cooking with the oil drums too, right?
Right. So, but I didn't see what I thought was American barbecue in Trinidad. I saw the bucaneering, and I see like it was more like a meat preservation technique or a grilling technique, but I didn't see anybody cooking in the ground or cooking barbecue as I knew it with butterflies. Like I did heard some people said in Tobago that they would do like a rotisserie of some sort, which is quite common.
Yeah.
But other than that, I mean, like I will travel to find what I think is the roots of American barbecue. I do want to go to Haiti one day and see what I can find in some of the maroon communities.
Yeah.
But I think my biggest hurdle now is I just need to spend some time and just take some stuff out of my head and put it on paper or put it in a documentary of some sort.
Man, I want to see that. I want to see that. If you want some help with that, I'll help you spit with that. Anything, I'm down, man. I just want to thank you. You know, is there anything else you wanted to say that we didn't really touch on?
I think we covered the bases. I mean, if people want to find me or whatever, I think I should tell them where to find me at.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to say right now.
I have a website. My personal website is howardconyers.com, and I'm most active on Instagram at CarolinaQNola_PhD. So you can see, like, I will show pictures of the past, or I try to educate people. Not only am I a rocket scientist, I try to educate people on food, history, and culture of the South, especially where I'm from. So that's all I really have to say, Roger.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you today, man, for coming, spending your time and spitting your knowledge with us and trying to unearth the truth of what's happening out there. And while we're having this conversation, the reality is everybody is welcome at the barbecue.
Oh, yeah. Everybody welcome at the barbecue, man. One day, Roger, on that note, one day I want to have a barbecue called Gumbo Jubilee. And I want to make Gumbo Jubilee like the biggest, baddest barbecue in the country and have music and culture. And I want to be like the Coachella of and barbecue at the backdrop, man. We'll be cooking whole hogs. Just like we did in those trenches, we have cows, we have lamb, turkey, potatoes. I mean, I want to have the whole spread. So, but the music is, you can't have, and I want to also have the spirits. I mean, the alcoholic beverages. I mean, you just can't have barbecue with just barbecue. You got to have the music and the alcohol with it to be authentic with it. So,
100%.
That's what I want to do one day, is have a massive barbecue like Coachella or Bonnaroo.
Wicked, man. Wicked. Well, I'm there with you, man. If you need some help with that, I'm down.
Hey, I'm going to solicit your services for sure, man. You'll come down and help me. I won't make you dig this time, though. I'm going to get some equipment.
But again, everybody's welcome at the barbecue. What we're trying to do here is unearth and trace the history and understand the facts of it. But it's food, and food is about spreading love and sharing it amongst the community, amongst everybody in the community who wants to participate and wants to be down. It's open door for anybody who wants to come in. We just want to understand the trajectory of how this thing came about and kind of uncover some of the wrongs that have been done in terms of whitewashing the history of this barbecue, right?
I agree with it. I agree wholeheartedly. All people are welcome to the barbecue, man. Barbecue is a one tool, I think, that can defeat racism in America.
Boom! He says it right there. You hear that, people? Say that again, Howard. Say it again.
I'm going to say barbecue is the one tool that can erase racism in America. And the reason I'm going to say that, Roger, Miss Leah Chase told me one time when I interviewed her, she said, gumbo changed the world. Her gumbo changed the world. And that was one of the last things she said with me. And I said, if we combine gumbo and whole hog, and Miss Chase is not with us anymore, God bless her soul. Nice. But barbecue could change people's lives. And so this is my gift to the world. Hopefully it helps somebody along the way.
That's a beautiful sentiment. Dr. Howard Conyers. Nobody likes to give him the respect of the doctor. I'm here to give you the respect of the doctor, my friend.
Thanks, bro. Really appreciate it, man.
All right. You have a great day. I appreciate the time. Bless.